For more than a decade, India's most influential news channel has built its unimpeachable reputation by keeping an unflagging vigil on every now moment of our times. 24 hours a day, Times Now serves as a perfect foil for India's diversity. A kaleidoscope of images and a cornucopia of views. As the day dawns, so does the common man on his favorite platform, Times Now. Times Now's vow to fight for the rights of the common man has led us to devise change-inducing campaigns, never failing to fight fear in the face of adversity with the power of the fact. To ensure our viewers were fully aware of the gravity of the once-in-a-century pandemic, Times Now unfurled the one-of-its-kind India Outbreak Report. When the COVID ghost of gloom haunted India, your channel, Times Now, shed light on the road to revival. Like the ever-blazing, life-giving sun, without fail, without exception, you will find Times Now's intrepid teams first on the horizon of the big national news story. While others resort to malpractice and drive a personal agenda, Times Now has never compromised on its credibility. Unwaveringly, unafraid, unflinchingly, honest, always. Just like India's democracy that empowers the last citizen, your channel has pledged to give voice to the most marginalized. Times Now's aggressive reporting style has made it the relentless force it is today, because your channel's only motivation is the people's conviction. Unblemished, uncompromised, unrelenting, unbiased, unintimidatable, unsurpassed. We are Times Now.
The actual action begins here.
Good evening, everyone. OFT presents Pragyan 21, powered by Autodesk and co-sponsored by Times Now, is back with the next installment of our guest lecture series, Illumináre. We would like to thank our English journal partner, Free Press Journal, our online news partner, News Karnataka and The Statesman, our online media partner, The Campus Media, and our Kannada news partner, Vartha Bharati, for their invaluable assistance. I, Shreya, and my co-host Siddharth welcome you to today's guest lecture.
Our guest is an esteemed entrepreneur who has achieved many things over the years. He is the founder of Linden Lab and High Fidelity, and the creator of the popular virtual reality game Second Life. In 2008, Linden Lab's Second Life was one of 3 products to win a Technology and Engineering Emmy Award in the category of User-Generated Content Game Modification. Let's welcome today's guest, Mr. Phillip Rosedale.
Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Rosedale. We're so glad to be doing this with you tonight.
Moving ahead to tonight's agenda. This month, one of your tweets caught our eyes. What if the next version of the internet replaced websites and servers with groups of people? What do you think about that?
When I began working on virtual worlds, which was really, I started thinking about them in the 90s, so really before the internet happened. And then as I began working on virtual reality and virtual worlds, I was struck by the difference between the world and the technology that enabled it, the sort of atoms of the digital space, if you will, and the impact that the world had on people. Because at the time, at least as a young person with an engineering background, I hadn't really given a lot of thought to what the effect of being in a virtual world would be on people. Over the years, though, of course, I've come to respect that the impact of how we come together in online spaces is fundamental. That it is, of course, now a factor for what happens to the world next, and perhaps how well we all do together. In it. It was going to be mediated by technology. When I made that tweet, I've been thinking a lot lately about how we can use technology in a way that is for the common good. That are there differences between making money and enabling people's lives to be as good as they can be with technology. And, unfortunately, coming from the land, I suppose, of capitalism, there are differences. There are cases in which we can make money but not help people, and the opposite as well. As I've thought about the future of the internet, I've thought a lot about identity and about community and about how people connect together. And so when I made that tweet, what I meant was simply to ask the question of whether or not a different type of local group or a different type of smaller community might sort of become something that feels like a website in the future. Maybe you go online, but you go and visit your friend's house or family or whatever the word becomes, but that is a kind of a cluster of people online. I don't know exactly whether that's what will happen, but it's something that in my design work I've been thinking about lately, and it's a good question.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. That was really interesting. Meanwhile, our listeners are requested to use the live chat section to ask your questions to Mr. Rosedale. We'll take it up later. So you started your first business at the age of 17, selling database systems to small businesses, which you used to fund your college education. How did you motivate yourself to pursue entrepreneurship at such a young age? And how did you keep yourself motivated?
Well, my parents were neither entrepreneurs nor technologists. So that's one thing. I wasn't trying to be like anybody else. As a kid, I was very, very interested in mechanical things and in electronics. This, of course, was right at the beginning of computers. I grew up in the 1970s and 80s. And so computers were just starting to happen, but I wasn't quite old enough to have been a part of the very first, home PCs, for example. But I kind of got there right at the end of that. And I had a real love of how things worked. I was that kid who would take everything apart and put it back together again. And I was fascinated by machinery. I was fascinated by, how things worked and how machines worked, how cars worked, for example. And as a result of that, when computers became available, I naturally wanted to use them for anything that I could. And so I taught myself to program computers and to write simple video games and things like that on the really inexpensive computers at the time. I had a Commodore 64. I had a Timex Sinclair. These are ancient computers from the 70s and 80s, and an Apple. And so as I got better and better at programming, I also was trying to make ends meet and figure out how to make some money. I didn't want to have a normal job, like everybody. I thought it'd be really cool if I could have my own business somehow. And I happened to find a kind of some companies in San Diego, where I grew up, the city of San Diego in California, that needed database programming. And so I built a little business actually building something a little bit like the internet, which gave me a good, got me ready for the internet, which was, I actually had the very first business that I did was connecting together car dealerships, because car dealerships would have used cars that they needed to sell. So of course, in a big city like San Diego, you might be interested in a certain kind of car, a Corvette or something. And then you would go to one dealership and say, do you have one? And if the dealership had known where another one was at another place, it would be a great thing for them. And so that was sort of one of the things that I sold these car dealers, was I had software that would telephone my home, actually my bedroom, every night with a computer modem, and share data so that all these car dealers could see what other cars there were at the other dealerships. And that was a business for me that put me through high school, and then ultimately helped me also put myself through college. And that was my first entrepreneurial experience, and it was a ton of fun. But yeah, I didn't really have a lot of reason to do it other than wanting to make money and maybe be able to study a little better.
I'm sure that inspired a lot of young entrepreneurs among our audience today. So moving on to the next question, sir. The platform Second Life that you created, it doesn't have winners or losers unlike other games of its type. So what makes Second Life so different in this concept?
You make me smile, because the popular television show The Office here, of course, took that very quote, "There are no winners and losers," and made it pretty funny. I can remember that when the Second Life came on that show, I was pretty happy. I felt like we've really made it now. We're on The Office. Right. The thing that was different about Second Life from the very beginning was that I didn't see it as a computer game. I wasn't much of a computer gaming person. I had played a few of them, but it wasn't my heart wasn't really there with kind of competitive computer games. I wasn't particularly good at them. I was much more of a builder than a player of things. And so for me, Second Life was an experiment in whether we could recreate a world where there was some kind of fair ability for everybody to manipulate the world. If you imagine a virtual world, it's going to have something like some kind of concept of land or space or something. And it's also going to have some resources, some natural resources that you use up at some point. So if one person takes all the building blocks and puts them on their land, well, there's nothing for anyone else, you know? And so from the very beginning, I was kind of trying to make something where a lot of people could make things together in some way that was kind of fair. And so I can remember that at the very start, given that there were not gaming rules, and there were not pre-assigned roles in any sense. I mean, everybody was just going to log in and, become part of the world. Because of that, I just tried to come up with the simplest ways to kind of enable that fairness amongst people. And that was basically an economy. And so, we had the first real digital economy long before Bitcoin. We had a currency which floated freely against the dollar and the euro and other currencies. And the reason for that was that I felt like establishing a currency and then giving a little bit of it out to everybody actually was probably the way to drive the most creative activity as quickly as I could, or at least for the time, that was the best I could think of. And so the world became this kind of blank canvas where people were building anything they could, but they were forced to do that in a shared space. And I think that idea of doing it in a shared space is very important and very different than what we've done with the internet mostly. We've mostly made private spaces, not public or shared spaces.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, Second Life was developed in the early 2000s, and a lot more technological advancements have taken place since in the field of VR. What was it like creating this platform, and how was it different from the present day VR and AR? We'd also like to know the thoughts you had while creating Second Life.
Well, you're right. With Moore's law, it's true that both computer speed and internet speed has actually advanced over the last, 20 years or so at roughly Moore's law. And so maybe every 2 or 3 years you had a doubling in the capability. And so you're quite right. The initial computer that was required for Second Life was a very different computer than we have today. It was much slower than an iPhone today, much slower than a mobile phone. In particular, by the way, the impetus for creating Second Life at all, the capability that I thought needed to exist for it to work at all, and I think I was still very early, was two things. The first one was broadband as a way of connecting to the internet. So there was a moment in the late 1990s where we changed over from the phone connection to the broadband connection, at least in the major cities in the United States and Europe, which was ahead. That was the first thing that I saw and I felt was necessary to create a live virtual world, because you would need to move around a lot more data than you could move around with a lot less delay than on a computer modem. Of course, we're speaking to an audience here, many of whom probably don't remember the computer modem, but if you don't, look it up. So the second thing that we needed was very, very fast computer graphics. The thing that happened in 1999 was that the company Dell started releasing the first NVIDIA GPU, which was called the GeForce 2. into all the computers. And those two things were what caused me to actually try to start the company at that time, because I felt that prior to that, it would be too early. So the key things that were important to the system at that early time was a way of people being able to see each other's digital bodies, their avatars, as we say in Second Life, and a way for people to share information about the objects in the world. Now, you couldn't do that with triangles as we do in 3D graphics today. You had to do it with simpler objects, because those triangles themselves would be far too much information to send over the internet and to render on the computer at that time. This is 2001 when we started. The first thing that we actually tried to do was a little bit like kind of recreating the universe. We started with a surface of water, where the surface of water could move and you could make ripples in it. You could touch it and you could make a wave, and that wave would spread in the water and go across more than one server. Again, we wanted to make a very large shared space, and so we had a server that would connect. We had square servers that would connect to the server next to it. And the first thing that we did that was exciting, for me at least, was we were able to make a little splash in the water and watch the ripple of the wave go across from one computer to the other and not look too bad. And of course, that required broadband as well. So we actually started with a very physical space that didn't even have people in it. And we simulated that space and convinced ourselves that we could do some sort of physics, some sort of world on top of many, many server computers at the same time. And that was the first thing. And then, there were probably 10 or 20 other very hard problems that we had to solve, like making the joints, making the fingers and hands and joints of a digital representation of a person move correctly. In the early 2000s, that was a much more difficult thing to do on the computer than it is today. It's very easy. I could go on for hours about that, because there were so many different things that we had to do to make it work. And many of the things in Second Life, such as people having pieces of land next to each other where they can build different things on each of those pieces of land, are still things that have not been done today, even with the computers and the really good game engines that we see out there today for graphics.
High Fidelity was found to create a next-generation virtual reality platform. Could you share a few of your experiences you had while working on developing various technologies to bring about the progress in VR and AR, if any more?
So in 2009, 10 years after starting Second Life, my co-founder, Ryan, who worked with me at the time, he and I left the company and were joined by a third friend and co-founder to create High Fidelity. The first thing we did was actually not High Fidelity. It was another set of projects that were also based on ideas we had, some of them about work, some of them about digital currency, some of them about shared exchange systems, and some non-virtual reality stuff. But when we worked on that from 2009 to 2013, in 2013, though, something very important happened, which was the chip that is inside the Oculus Rift headset, the VR headset. The very first chip came out, and many chips, of course, came out, but there was a key part, which was called the MEMS gyro, the gyroscope that was built on a single chip that could sense the rotation of something. And that chip was the key, because it was the chip that enabled an inexpensive VR headset to be made that wouldn't make you sick, because it was fast enough to sense the motion and re-render the image in front of you. I bought one of those chips from the parts market, and I hooked it up at my desk to an oscilloscope so that I could hold the chip in my hand and tilt it and watch the scope move. Everyone at the office said, What is he doing? At the time, we were working on software. We weren't working on any sort of hardware or VR or anything. I called everybody in the office. At the time, we were about 10 people or 12 people. I told everyone, come over and see this. And I said, look at this little chip that I'm holding with wires coming off of it. And they said, what is that? And I said, look, and I'm turning it and I'm watching the signal on the oscilloscope move as I turn it. And with that, I turned to everyone and I said, we're shutting this company down right now. And we're going to go back into virtual worlds. And we're going to build a whole new platform. And what I thought was that the head-mounted display, the VR headset, would become consumer adopted within maybe 4 or 5 years. This was in 2013. And I thought that what we would do is build a completely new software platform, somewhat like Second Life, that would allow people that were wearing those headsets to go into a virtual world, a new virtual world, together with each other. And of course, now they would be able to use their hands to build, and they would be able to communicate with each other much more naturally than ever before. That was the initial mission of High Fidelity. And as an entrepreneur, I had already made a very big mistake, which was that I was much too early. Even though the Oculus Rift and now the Oculus Quest and the other VR devices that were out there were being built, they weren't anywhere near good enough, and they still are not, to be something that we can all use every day. For example, as many of you know, you can't type. You can't send a message while you're wearing one of these things. It's uncomfortable. You're not going to wear it for more than a half an hour. And maybe most importantly, it doesn't make you feel safe because your face is covered up in something, and the people around you, you're blindfolded or blinded to the people that are near you. And so the mistake that I made as an entrepreneur, which is a mistake that many entrepreneurs make, was simply to be too optimistic and too early. And so we spent 6 years building that software platform, and we did a very good job of it. We built an amazing new platform that allowed people to use multiple servers to create a space that was so live feeling that, you know, you really felt like you were there and you were wearing the virtual reality headset. But then the question is, what did I do after that? Well, the first part of the system that we had built for High Fidelity was for your ears. So the first sense that we tried to create and make it work perfectly in a virtual world was the sense of sound. We wanted you to put on a Oculus Rift, and we wanted you to turn your head, and we wanted the world to sound exactly correct. If there were birds over there, or a person in front of you, or a group of people standing around, we wanted you to hear them with no delay, absolutely perfectly, and in the direction where the sound was coming from. So the first thing that we built is now the thing that we sell, which is this ability to spatialize sound in 3 dimensions for a lot of sounds at the same time. And this is something that is completely unique, like much of the work in Second Life, and has not been done by anyone else yet. And so our pivot as entrepreneurs was to stop working on trying to make this headset work. And what we've decided now is to provide this audio capability, which, for example, will make experiences like this one better by allowing each of us to hear each other as if we were sort of floating in space in front of each other. And that would allow the 3 of us to talk at the same time without not being able to understand each other, as we sometimes experience today in systems like Zoom or StreamYard that we're using here.
Thank you, sir. I think that gave us a lot of insight into the scopes that are there in VR and AR. So Industry 4.0 has been the talk of the day. And a lot of technologies have been developed over the past decade that has contributed towards a shift in the functioning of various sectors and industries. So, what is your opinion on how VR can be used in other fields like marketing or teaching?
There's little doubt that the impact of VR on some vertical industries is going to happen sooner than it will ultimately happen for consumer experiences and entertainment and things like something like Second Life. I think one of the first fields that will be affected is education. As soon as we are able to keep the headsets on for longer and write and type better while we're in them, as soon as that happens, I think we're going to see a real revolution in the way that we can teach. Obviously, the best teachers in some subject are randomly distributed throughout the world, and so are the students. And so if you'd like to have a class taught by a famous archaeologist, most students are not going to be able to sit in a room with that person. But of course, with VR, they will. And I think that there's little doubt that people are going to buy VR devices and use them for education in a way that is very surprising, even to the people working in VR. And that is probably going to happen, in the next few years. We're going to see it happening. So I think that the industry of teaching is going to be greatly changed, and hopefully for the better. My worries there, of course, is that we must find a way to make this equipment accessible to everyone, not just those who can afford it, in the same way that, many countries have made education available to everybody. But education with VR also needs to be available to everybody. It needs to not be something for the elite. I think, as you mentioned, other industries such as simulation and training in industry will also very substantially benefit from this new technology. One of the areas that I've written about as a potential area for industrial opportunity, and I'm surprised that it has not happened more yet, is the use of the VR device to remotely operate a robot. And that robot could do something like work in a dangerous environment, or communicate with people very naturally, or it could be a very large robot that could load a truck or something like that. These are things that I think would be much more easily done, for example, by remote human operators than by AI systems. And so I'm surprised that we haven't yet gone after the opportunity to connect robots to VR devices as a safer, better way of doing a lot of things that we might like to do with robots. So I'm curious as to when that will happen, and I predict that it will happen at some point, and I've written about it separately.
Those are very interesting possibilities. So during this pandemic, people have found various ways to cope with the new normal. A lot of them have turned to platforms like Second Life, where you can create an alternate world with conditions more ideal to you. As a creator, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm still thinking. This has been one of the most amazing moments in human history. We've all been forced to communicate online, where before we could only do it very occasionally and speculate about it. It seems like in 2020, we suddenly had to learn about video, for example. How does it work? What can we do on video? What can we not do? Should we all buy these fancy microphones? A lot of things changed very rapidly with COVID, but as you say, we were finally pushed more than ever before to do everything online, and then look back at that and see what worked and what didn't. One of the things that we're learning, I think, from COVID is that communication is more subtle and wonderful than we thought. It is not as easy to communicate with each other online as we thought it would be. For example, when we use video all day, we become very tired. We don't know why. At the end of the day, we're just tired. And of course, there's a lot of research being done now on why that is. One of the reasons is that we're seeing people's faces much too close all day long. And having people having their face pointing right at you all day long causes a lot of physiological stress. And this is something that, one of my advisors to the company at Stanford has been writing his whole career about, is studying these things. But I think we found one thing, which is that it's much more challenging to go online and feel like we're really there with someone. It's easy to broadcast information if you want to just talk and have people listen, like we're doing right now for the most part. That is pretty easy, and we've gotten good at it, and we have good software for it. But really allowing people to come together and feel close to each other, to feel warm, to feel connected, to feel friends, this is a much harder problem. And it's the one that I think we're now committed, I hope, to fixing. The benefit of this is that if we can really cause online systems to bring people together, like, frankly, they have been brought together in Second Life, we have some chance at making the world better, by connecting people that are far away and allowing them to become friends and to solve problems together. But I think that what we've learned in 2020 is that it's quite difficult to do this. And it makes me smile a little bit, because these are the challenges that we've been facing for 20 years with virtual worlds. And they're very big challenges. I think sometimes people say, oh, that will be very easy. We'll just put people, on Zoom or whatever. Well, we learned this year that it's maybe a bit harder than that.
Yes, sir, that's very true. So we've actually faced a lot of challenges shifting entirely to an online platform, even as students. So now there's a lot of emerging blockchain technologies, crypto and NFTs, and games like Second Life can be made more profound, and it can be made into a virtual ecosystem where these entities can be used as a transactional measure. Could you shed some light on this?
Yes. Second Life was certainly the very first digital currency, and also the first concept of an NFT. In fact, we had a famous meeting in 2004 where I brought together a number of people. One of them was a very noted legal scholar and political thinker named Lawrence Lessig. He was one of the people in this meeting that we had in 2004. And we talked at that time about Second Life and about how people's property needed to be held and owned and transferable. I tell a funny story because at the time, Lawrence Lessig said in this meeting, digital goods must be alienable. And he used this word, alienable. I did not know what it meant. And so I sat there nodding and thinking, I don't know what this word means. Later, I learned that it means exactly the most important part of an NFT, which is it means that when you own something that you can give to someone else without approval, you don't need any process to do that. You can sell it to someone or give it to someone else by your choice. This is a very powerful idea, and it's part of what makes property property. The idea that you can, take your shoes off and give them to someone else or sell them to someone else is part of what makes the shoes yours, and it makes them things that have a value. And so in the beginning of Second Life, we did exactly that, as we see today with NFTs. We made property in Second Life something that you could mark down on it who it belonged to, and you could give it to someone else freely. And that was unquestionably one of the things that has caused Second Life to be so successful. It's one of the things that causes Second Life to have more than $500 million a year in transactions between people, is this concept of a digital good. And that is exactly what an NFT is this new concept of a digital good. And we worked on this also in High Fidelity in 2016. We built the very same thing that we're doing today, that people are doing today with NFTs, which was a digital good that had a certificate, and the certificate is stored on a blockchain and can be transferred between people freely. So the core idea of digital goods having a reality, because they have a representation which can be freely exchanged, is critical to the idea of the NFT. And I believe that it is also, in large, a very powerful thing for artists and for businesses and for everyone else. However, this idea still has some very substantial problems. First of all, the ecological impact of blockchains is very considerable. As many know, the operation of the blockchain is essentially a contest where people contribute their own computing power as a means of getting paid in new units of currency. And what this means is, of course, as the price of the currency goes up, the amount of electricity and computing resources that is used to compete for these prizes goes up in the same amount. So if the price of Bitcoin increases by 2, the amount of electricity being used worldwide on Bitcoin will also increase by 2. And the amount of electricity being used worldwide on Bitcoin today is something equivalent to a medium to larger sized country. I think right now it changes from week to week, but I think the last time I looked, Bitcoin was the size of Chile in terms of electrical output. And this is, of course, a very big problem for a world that's becoming warmer and warmer. We cannot afford to use electricity only to compete for bits of digital currency and heat up the environment at the same time. And so this is something I feel strongly that as technologists, we need to fix, and we need to do it very quickly. It's one of the things that, will be important to help with global warming. The second thing about NFTs right now is that much like the stock market sometimes, or like anything else that involves speculation, there's probably more speculation going on than there is real value. I don't think that the excitement in the NFT market is only driven by the idea that you might own some piece of digital art. It is driven more by the simple fact that you can bet on these things. And so there's a kind of a gambling going on with NFTs. And I think, unfortunately, that will not have as many, that will not create success. That is simply a shuffling around of money. And so we're in a hype period with that will have to go away first for there to be any real value. But Second Life did the NFT and the digital currency first and has been very successful because of it. And so I definitely believe in the opportunity of the NFT.
Okay. We will be taking a few questions from our audience now. If you could do one thing differently while creating Second Life, what would it have been?
What a wonderful question. I think that I would have made it. I would have made it in even more of a public space. I would have worked a bit. Second Life is divided into very large continents in which you can walk everywhere, in which there is public access to everything, and then private spaces, which are like islands that are right now about of the same size as the public spaces, if I remember correctly. I think in retrospect, I would have focused more both on people and of the impact of the technology on people. And look, with the benefit of living now, I would have worked even harder on focusing on the positive aspects and the social impact to people, to people's personalities and to their lives of interacting with each other. I probably would have, knowing what I know now, I probably would have applied some of the most recent lessons that we have about where technology can go wrong. And I would have taken those ideas back in time, and have done things a bit differently. For example, I think that owning virtual real estate outright and being able to control everything that happens on your little piece of land and not having to care or not having to abide by any regulations whatsoever when you build things on that land is a bit much. That's a bit too much capitalism. And I would have changed that if I could have. But at the time, I thought that what we were doing was the best possible way of doing things.
If blockchain were to replace the current financial system, developers could face the same fiduciary liability as banks do. What do you think of this ideology?
Well, there's a lot to be said there. one of the risks with blockchain is that that people might face less liability in some sense. For example, the anonymous nature of some of the blockchains, for example, Bitcoin, can enable people to make transactions that there's no record of. And that obviously has a criminal risk associated with it. Similarly, what we're seeing with some of the distributed finance projects and coins that are going around is that developers can make money without facing any of the financial regulations related to fraud that the real world, most countries at least, have established. We know historically that if people are anonymous, they will take advantage of each other in ways that require regulation. In a completely open market where people can be anonymous, there's too much fraud. This is famously referred to in many different ways. One of them is the tragedy of the commons, this expression meaning that people, if they're anonymous, if people are not known to each other, they will tend to borrow from a common resource to the point where that resource fails. Another famous social psychology thing is called the prisoner's dilemma, in which two people are given a challenge where they can either betray each other or work together and cooperate. In the case where they are not likely to meet each other again, they will always betray each other. And in the case where they're likely to be part of a community in the future and to have to interact again, they tend to cooperate. This is at the core of the design of internet systems. If we can design these systems to allow cooperation, we will get to a good place. If we are all anonymous, then we already know what the outcome will be. We will tend to hurt each other on average. And so going back to the question about blockchain, the same applies there. Completely anonymous financial systems in which no one has any responsibility are going to be a bad thing. We're going to see much more crime and much more fraud. But if we can come up with ways where developers do face the same fiduciary liability as banks do, and there are many developers, hence kind of more banks, I think that's a good thing. But I worry about how we apply that liability, because presently the existing systems we have are largely anonymous and therefore problematic. But I do think there are many ways, and there are many good companies that are exploring this right now. There are many systems that can add a layer of identity to the blockchain that is correct for creating the right balance between developers being experimental and a level of responsibility for what we're doing.
So the next question is, what's next for High Fidelity?
Right now, 2 months ago, we decided that the audio technology that we have is so good that we wanted to make it something that everybody could use as quickly and as easily as possible inside other applications, like, for example, this one that we're using right now. And so we've made a version of High Fidelity's API that is available as of 6 weeks ago for people to license to use inside software. This is a kind of business we've never done before. I've always been a consumer software person, and so it's an interesting learning experience for me. But that's what we're doing next. We're going to try to get this magical 3D audio experience to be something that is in every video conferencing system and every game, because we do feel that, and if you haven't had the experience, go to High Fidelity and try it. We do feel that the feeling of being able to speak to people really intimately and feel really comfortable when you're talking to them is something that really would be good for everyone right now, and something that can address the problems that we've seen with communication during COVID. So that's what's next for us today.
That sounds very interesting, especially on the whole online platform scenario. The next question is, what is the scope of virtual reality? Can we see any major big breakthroughs in any areas apart from gaming in the near future?
Well, we talked a little bit earlier about education, simulation, piloting robots. let me say, though, what I think the breakthroughs are that have to happen in VR that will make a big difference. One of them, of course, is that the level of detail in the screens and what you can see and what you can read with your eyes is not yet high enough in VR. And so, again, we have to make experiences that are more like gaming experiences than communication and intelligence experiences, because we just don't have enough pixels for the eyes yet. Although the latest versions of the VR headsets are now getting good enough, as expected, to where they have enough pixels. The bigger problem, as I said earlier, is that we still cannot use our hands and our bodies as effectively as we do with a mouse and a keyboard when we have these headsets on. This problem is a very significant problem. The way that it will be solved, though, is to make it possible to see through the VR headset using a camera. And there are several startups that are doing this today. And there's a little bit of progress in the existing products like the Oculus Quest, where you'll be able to wear one of these devices, but look down at your keyboard and see it and type on it normally. That change, I think, will happen in the next 2 or 3 years. We'll see products that allow that, so that you could wear some sort of glasses, but still sit at your computer. But now the screen is the entire room for you. That change is a very significant one. And I was very excited about it during High Fidelity, during our initial work. I think I was just a little bit early on the prediction, but I do think that's going to happen soon. It'll be very exciting to see.
Okay. So now we'd like to move to our next session, which is a fun rapid fire round. So what has been your go-to hobby during quarantine and the whole COVID situation?
I've been learning to program in a new language that's a web language called Processing, which is a JavaScript language that lets you do graphics. And I've been doing little experiments with economies and basic income, and kind of playing around with simulating real world economies. That's been I don't know if you call that a hobby. I'm not much of a hobby person. I'm much more of a builder in my spare time.
That sounds fun. And what is the most recent book that you read?
There's a lot of books on my nightstand, but there's one called Citizen, that is a book about, it's a book by a remarkable artist, but it is a reflection on being Black in America, and it's a very moving, powerful book. Citizen.
What's the one thing that you're looking forward to the most this year?
Walking down the street and giving people hugs. Again, I would like to go back to New York and do that. That'll be a wonderful thing. I live in San Francisco.
And knowing what you know now, what advice would you be giving your 20-year-old self?
Slow down. Take your time. Enjoy the ride. I ran too fast. That's what I'd tell myself.
If not an entrepreneur, what would your profession be?
I would have been some sort of an artist or a builder. That's much more where my heart is. I think I've only been successful as an entrepreneur because I was able to build interesting things. I have a lot of respect for entrepreneurs who approach it differently, but that's not me. I just make things.
So if you could spend a day in someone else's shoes, whose would they be?
Richard Feynman, the physicist.
What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Stop talking.
All right. What is your favorite invention of all time?
I think the internet. I mean, the ability to send information across the world is pretty amazing. Maybe even cooler than flying, right?
What's something which you say you will do, but you probably never will?
Well, finish things. I have many unfinished things. I think I'll probably die with many unfinished projects.
If you can have a dinner party with just 2 people in the world, who's on your invite list?
Well, Richard Feynman, I said, would probably be a temptation because of the shared interest in physics. Probably a great human leader of some kind. I don't know. I mean, any of those who have had to lead substantial parts of mankind, I'd be glad to get a chance to talk to. I don't know. I'd take any of them. But on the physics side, Mr. Feynman.
Mr. Rosedale, we are immensely grateful to you for sharing your wisdom and experiences with us. Thank you so much for your time, and we wish you success in all your future endeavors.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been enjoyable to talk to everyone today.
And that was the dynamic Phillip Rosedale, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the event. We'll be back soon with the next chapter of Illumináre. Till then, take care and stay safe.
For more than a decade, India's most influential news channel has built its unimpeachable reputation by keeping an unflagging vigil on every now moment of our times. 24 hours a day, Times Now serves as a perfect foil for India's diversity. A kaleidoscope of images and a cornucopia of views. As the day dawns, so does the common man on his favorite platform, Times Now. Times Now's vow to fight for the rights of the common man has led us to devise change-inducing campaigns, never failing to fight fear in the face of adversity with the power of the fact. To ensure our viewers were fully aware of the gravity of the once-in-a-century pandemic, Times Now unfurled the one-of-its-kind India Outbreak Report. When the COVID ghost of gloom haunted India, your channel, Times Now, shed light on the road to revival. Like the ever-blazing, life-giving sun, without fail, without exception, you will find Times Now's intrepid teams first on the horizon of the big national news story. While others resort to malpractice and drive a personal agenda, Times Now has never compromised on its credibility. Unwaveringly, unafraid, unflinchingly, honest, always. Just like India's democracy that empowers the last citizen, your channel has pledged to give voice to the most marginalized. Times Now's aggressive reporting style has made it the relentless force it is today, because your channel's only motivation is the people's conviction. Unblemished, uncompromised, unrelenting, unbiased, unintimidatable, unsurpassed. We are Times Now.
The actual action begins here.